"What are you doing here?" She didn't notice the neighbor at first. Mrs. Carter, a woman in her early 60s, had been watching from behind her curtains for the last few minutes, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Maya had grown used to this, the uncomfortable glances, the whispers, the way people in the neighborhood seemed to stiffen whenever she passed. She'd learned to ignore it, focusing on her studies, her life, her goals. But tonight, something was different. Maya shifted on the porch, adjusting the strap of her bag. The peaceful silence of the evening was broken by the sound of a car door slamming, followed by footsteps on the sidewalk. Maya looked up, her heart giving a small, involuntary flutter, as she saw Mrs. Carter stepping toward her, with a phone pressed to her ear. "Excuse me, young lady," Mrs. Carter called out, her tone sharp. "What are you doing out here?" Maya blinked, taken aback. It wasn't the first time she'd been asked about her presence in the neighborhood, but this time there was something in Mrs. Carter's voice that didn't sit right. It was like she was being accused of something she hadn't done. "I'm just waiting for my ride," Maya said calmly, keeping her voice steady. She didn't look at the woman directly, but kept her eyes focused ahead, trying to keep her composure. But Mrs. Carter didn't let it go. "Is that so? I don't think anyone's waiting for you, and I don't appreciate strangers hanging around my street at this hour." Maya's stomach tightened. The words stung more than they should have. She'd been here for weeks, living in the house her father had bought for their family. But to Mrs. Carter, she was still an outsider, someone who didn't belong, someone who didn't have a right to stand on her own porch. "I'm not a stranger," Maya replied, her voice tight. "I live here." Mrs. Carter took a step forward, her phone still pressed to her ear. "I'll be calling the police," she said, her voice filled with authority. "This doesn't look right." Maya's heart dropped. She knew exactly what this was. Another instance of racial profiling, another instance of someone deciding her worth based on the color of her skin. The accusation, the suspicion, the judgment, it was all too familiar. But for the first time, Maya felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt before. Anger, yes, but also a quiet determination. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, she stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a stone. Her mind raced, her body tense, but she refused to let her emotions show. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. Maya watched as Mrs. Carter turned away, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked back to her house. Maya's eyes flicked down to the ground, but she didn't move. She heard the muffled sound of the phone call and the faint static of an operator picking up. A moment passed, maybe two. It felt like an eternity. And then it hit her. Mrs. Carter wasn't just calling the cops. She was calling them on Maya, on her. Maya stood frozen as the realization washed over her. The police would come. They would ask questions. They would look at her with suspicion. She knew the drill, the way the system treated people who looked like her. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a setup. A moment that would define her, change her life, or maybe destroy it. The police would arrive soon, but Maya didn't feel afraid. She felt something else, something more. This wasn't just about being wrongly accused. It was about something much bigger. It was about her right to exist, to be, to stand in her own space without fear. The anger was there, but it was wrapped in something deeper now, something colder. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. A text from her father. "I'm on my way. Stay calm." Maya's lips pressed together in a tight line. Her father would be furious. He didn't have to say much for Maya to know what he was thinking. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Maya glanced toward the street, where Mrs. Carter was still pacing near her front door, no doubt talking to the dispatcher about a suspicious person. The police were on their way, and there was no escaping what was about to unfold. But in that moment, something inside Maya clicked. The fear, the anxiety. It all slipped away, replaced by an ice-cold resolve. She wasn't just going to stand here and wait for the police to arrive. She wasn't just going to let someone else dictate the terms of her life. Maya straightened her back, lifted her chin, and took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do now. The distant hum of a car engine grew louder, and Maya could hear the unmistakable sound of sirens cutting through the air, sharp and commanding. A few seconds later, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of the house, tires screeching slightly as they halted. Maya felt her body tighten, but her resolve only hardened. This wasn't the first time she'd been targeted because of her race, but today it would be different. As the officers stepped out, she kept her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. The officers were tall, their faces unreadable. One was a woman, short hair and a stern expression. The other, a man, looked barely out of his 20s, his features soft but his eyes cold. They approached her, and Maya's heart didn't skip a beat. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman officer said, her voice flat. "Is there a problem here?" Maya glanced at Mrs. Carter, standing just inside her front door, watching the scene unfold. The neighbor's eyes were wide, her expression filled with a mixture of satisfaction and smugness. "I live here," Maya said calmly, holding the officer's gaze, her voice steady. "There's no problem, but apparently I'm a problem to her." The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing between Maya and Mrs. Carter. "What's this about, ma'am?" she asked, turning to the neighbor. Mrs. Carter's voice shook with what Maya recognized as righteous indignation. "This girl—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. She was standing on her porch, acting suspicious, and I just felt uncomfortable. I don't know who she is or what she's doing here. She's a stranger in our neighborhood, and I've seen her walking around here before. The woman officer nodded as if taking in this information. "And you called us because you felt uncomfortable?" "Yes," Mrs. Carter replied. "She's been hanging around here for a while, and something just doesn't sit right with me. I don't feel safe with her around." Maya's fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't react. The officer didn't seem moved, just scribbling something down in her notebook. The man officer spoke up, glancing at Maya's backpack. "What's in your bag, miss?" "Books," Maya said flatly. "Do you need to see them?" He hesitated for a moment, then waved his hand dismissively. "No, it's fine." The tension in the air thickened, and Maya's eyes flicked back to Mrs. Carter. The neighbor was standing taller now, her body language stiff and proud. She had already made her mind up. Maya was the problem. But Maya wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. "You don't get to decide if I belong here," Maya said, her voice quiet but sharp. "I'm a resident of this neighborhood. You can't just call the police on me because I'm black and standing on my own porch. You don't get to decide that." The woman officer's gaze shifted to Maya, her eyes narrowing. "You need to calm down, ma'am," she said, the words almost dripping with disdain. But Maya stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "I am calm," she replied, her tone icy. "I'm just not going to let this slide." You're wrong to treat me like this, and you know it." The silence between them stretched, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Mrs. Carter opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Maya's father's voice boomed from behind her. "What's going on here?" He stepped onto the porch, his presence undeniable. A sharp suit, a calm yet commanding aura. It was clear who he was. The officers turned, momentarily stunned. Maya's father, Darius Montgomery, was a man of power. He wasn't just any CEO, he was the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world. His face, a perfect blend of strength and authority, carried the weight of years spent in boardrooms, navigating a world that wasn't made for people like him. The woman officer straightened, her professional demeanor slipping for a moment. "Sir, we're investigating a complaint." "I heard," Darius replied coolly, his voice low but unmistakable. "And I can't help but wonder why a white woman called the cops on my daughter for standing on her own porch. Is there something I missed?" Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of relief flood through her. Her father's presence was enough to shift the entire dynamic of the situation. His reputation, his stature, it all carried weight. "I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal," Maya continued, her voice steady now, finding strength in the protection of her father. "I didn't do anything wrong." But apparently she felt uncomfortable because of the color of my skin. Darius glanced at Mrs. Carter, his gaze piercing. "You're saying my daughter was suspicious?" he asked, his words deliberately measured. "Because she's black and standing outside her house." Mrs. Carter opened her mouth to speak, but seemed to think better of it. The words she'd been so quick to call the police with didn't sound so strong now that Maya's father stood there, a man whose influence reached far beyond this small town. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Carter finally mumbled, clearly rattled. "I didn't mean to make a big deal out of this." Maya's father didn't answer right away, but his eyes remained locked on hers, unflinching. "I think it's time for you to reconsider who the real threat is," he said. His voice was quiet, but every word held weight. "My daughter has every right to stand on her porch. You, on the other hand, should think carefully before making baseless accusations again." Mrs. Carter recoiled, her face flushing, and for the first time Maya saw her shift uncomfortably. She had been caught, and there were consequences for that. The woman officer finally spoke, looking at her partner, her voice reluctant. "Perhaps we should wrap this up then." She glanced at Maya's father, who hadn't even broken a sweat. "Everything seems to be in order here, sir." Maya nodded, her voice steady but triumphant. "It is. I'll be fine." Darius turned to Maya, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go inside, Maya," he said. "We're done here." Inside the house, the front door closed softly behind them, sealing out the cool evening air and the weight of the confrontation. Maya leaned against the wall by the entryway, her pulse still racing, her body tight with adrenaline. Darius didn't say anything at first. He simply took off his jacket, his movements measured, before he finally turned to face her. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, his expression unreadable. But Maya knew better than to mistake his calm demeanor for indifference. She nodded, though the anger still simmered inside her. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight. "It's just, I can't believe it happened again." Her father's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking to the front window, though the blinds now shielded them from the view of the street. "I can. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." His tone was firm, But there was something else in his eyes, something deeper, a layer of exhaustion that Maya had never noticed before. It wasn't just the fight he'd put in for her. It was the weight of the years he'd spent navigating a world that hadn't been built for him or people like them. "Don't let it consume you, Maya," he said, his voice a little softer now. "I know it's hard. But you can't fight every battle. Some of them will come to you, and when they do, you fight back. But don't let this define you." Maya swallowed hard, her throat tight. "It's just, I can't stop thinking about it. She was so quick to call the cops, like I was a criminal just for being here, just for existing." Darius stepped closer, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "And that's the problem, Maya. People like her are so quick to assume that you're something less than you are. That's racism, plain and simple. It's not your fault, but it is your fight now." Maya looked down at her hands, her fingers still tingling from the intensity of the confrontation. The sting of the accusation, the weight of her own anger, it had all piled up in her chest, a heavy burden she wasn't sure how to release. "I know," she whispered, "but what do I do now? What if it happens again? What if they come for me next time? What if I'm not strong enough to handle it?" Her father's gaze softened, and he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you know. Don't ever doubt that. You carry something they can't see. Your mother carried it too. I see it in you every day." Maya let out a breath, her mind still spinning, but her father's words settled over her like a blanket of comfort. He was right. She had fought so many battles silently, internally, without even realizing how far she'd come. But this moment, felt like the start of something bigger, something she couldn't just ignore. "Let's go for a walk," Darius suggested, his voice steady and calm as he turned toward the door. "Get some fresh air." Maya hesitated but nodded. "I don't want to be around here anymore. I need to get out of this house." "Good. Let's walk. Clear your head." They left the house together, walking down the quiet suburban streets. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a dimming sky that felt both peaceful and ominous at once. The world seemed to have slowed down, the noises of the city in the distance fading into the background, and for a moment Maya felt like she was alone in her thoughts. Her father stayed close beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. "You're not alone in this, Maya," he said, his voice steady as he broke the silence. "We're in this together. We always have been." Maya nodded, her mind still racing. "But you're a CEO. You have power, connections. What about me? I don't have that. I'm just a kid." Darius chuckled softly, the sound warm and reassuring. "It's not about the power, Maya. It's about your voice. It's about standing up when it's hard. And I'm proud of you for doing that today." Maya glanced up at him, her face softening. "You're right," she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "I can do this." Her father gave her a small nod. "I know you can." Later that night, after dinner, as Maya sat in her room, the weight of the earlier events still hung in the air, but something had shifted inside her. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could change how she moved forward from it. She wasn't going to let Mrs. Carter or anyone else define her. She picked up her phone, hesitated for a moment, then typed out a message to a few friends. "Meet me at the cafe tomorrow. We're talking. I have something to say." As she hit send, a feeling of resolve washed over her. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The cafe was quiet the next afternoon, the late afternoon light casting a golden glow through the large windows. Maya sat at a corner table, her fingers drumming lightly against the surface as she waited. The place was a sanctuary of sorts, familiar and comforting, a small local spot where she and her friends often hung out. Her friends trickled in one by one, each offering a knowing glance when they saw Maya sitting alone at the table. It was clear from the start that they all had something on their minds. The events of the previous day had spread like wildfire through the community, and everyone had something to say. First came Rachel, a tall girl with long brown hair and a calm demeanor. She slid into the seat across from Maya, her eyes soft with concern. "You okay?" Rachel asked gently, her voice low enough that only Maya could hear. "I'm fine," Maya replied, giving a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been better." Rachel didn't push it, and instead, her eyes flicked toward the door as the others began to file in. There was no avoiding it now. The incident from yesterday had clearly shaken everyone, but Maya knew this conversation was necessary. The tension in the air was thick, as if everyone knew something was about to change, but none of them were quite sure how or when. Before anyone else could say anything, Malik, one of Maya's closest friends, spoke up. His voice was sharp, almost accusatory. "Maya, we saw what happened. Your dad, he's a CEO, right? Why didn't you call him immediately? Why didn't you tell the cops to leave the second they showed up?" Maya looked at him, feeling a pang of guilt twist in her stomach. She hadn't called her father earlier, even though she knew he was just down the street. She'd been so caught up in the moment, so focused on maintaining control, that the idea of involving him seemed unnecessary at first. But now, after everything that had happened, she realized that calling him wasn't just a choice. It was an act of power. "I didn't want it to escalate," she said softly, her voice quiet but firm. "But then, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, about how we let this stuff slide. I wanted to handle it on my own at first, but now I know that's not enough." Malik nodded, though there was still tension in his eyes. "You're right. But you shouldn't have to handle it on your own, Maya. We're all in this together. You've got a voice, and people will listen to you if you let them, if you show them you won't back down." Maya looked around at the faces of her friends. Rachel was nodding along, and Jamal, who had been quiet until now, added, "What's next, though? What are you going to do about Mrs. Carter? She just got away with it. She called the cops on you because she didn't like the way you looked." Maya paused. She hadn't thought about it that way, but Jamal was right. Mrs. Carter had gotten away with it. There was no consequence for her, no accountability. The anger that had simmered in Maya's chest the day before began to boil again, but this time she knew exactly where to direct it. "You're right," she said, a cold edge to her voice. "She needs to be held accountable. And I'm not going to let this go. Not this time." The table fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. But there was something in Maya's eyes now, a spark, a fire that hadn't been there before. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was running from the problem. She was going to confront it head on. "We have to do something more than just talk about it," Maya continued, her tone becoming more resolute. "I'm going to make sure this gets out there. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been targeted like this. I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to make sure she can't hide anymore." Rachel leaned forward, her voice determined. "What do you need from us, Maya?" Maya's gaze hardened, and she looked around at her friends. They were all in this together now. They would fight not just for justice for Maya, but for every person who had ever been targeted by prejudice. "We'll take action," Maya said, her voice steady. "We'll use our voices, our platforms. I'm going to share my story, but I need you all to help me. We need to spread the word. We need to make sure people hear about this and understand what it really means. We can't let this go unnoticed." There was a murmur of agreement from the table, a quiet sense of unity that made Maya's heart swell with something deeper than just anger. It was purpose, a purpose that would drive her forward. Malik's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he didn't look at her with pity or concern. He looked at her with respect. "We've got your back, Maya. Whatever you need." Maya nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "We'll make sure it counts. And she'll know that her actions have consequences." Later that evening, Maya sat at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. She hesitated for a moment before she began typing. The words flowed easily now, no longer weighed down by the hesitation that had held her back before. She was ready to speak up, ready to make her voice heard. "Yesterday, I stood on my porch minding my business when I was accused of something I didn't do. A neighbor, someone I've never even spoken to, decided that my presence was enough to call the police. She didn't know me. She didn't care to know me. All she saw was a black girl standing on her porch, and that was enough to make her feel uncomfortable. But what I've realized is this. It's not about my actions. It's about her perception of me. And that perception, fueled by prejudice and bias, is what led to a moment that could have escalated into something dangerous. But I'm not letting it slide. I refuse to let her think she can get away with it. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been made to feel less than just because of the color of their skin. I am not afraid to speak up, and I'm not backing down. I will use my voice, my platform, and my power to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. The next few days felt like a blur. Maya's post about the incident had gone viral, spreading quickly through social media and beyond. People who had never met her shared her story, their voices joining hers in solidarity. Comments poured in, some supportive, others skeptical, and a few downright hostile. But through it all, Maya remained resolute. She wasn't backing down. This wasn't just about her. It was about the countless others who had faced similar discrimination without anyone to stand up for them. On Thursday afternoon, Maya and her father sat in his office. Darius had agreed to meet with her to discuss the next steps, and although he hadn't said much in the past few days, Maya could sense that something was building inside him too. He was proud of her for speaking out, but there was a quiet storm behind his calm exterior. "So the media's eating this up," Darius said, his voice steady but sharp. "You've made your point, Maya. People are listening. But what now?" Maya sat across from him, a folder of documents open in front of her. "What now?" She leaned forward, determination clear in her eyes. "Now we go after Mrs. Carter. We expose her for what she really is." Darius raised an eyebrow, his gaze steady. "Expose her how?" Maya's fingers tapped lightly on the table as she spoke. "We don't just tell our story. We make sure the world knows the truth. We make sure she faces the consequences for calling the cops on me, for racially profiling me. There needs to be accountability." Darius studied her for a long moment. Maya knew what he was thinking. He was trying to measure the weight of her words. He had always been a man of action, but his actions were calculated, precise. He didn't act on impulse. He thought things through, and Maya wasn't sure if he was ready for this. "You're saying we go public with this?" he asked slowly, his voice low. "You think it's worth the backlash?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I know it is." Darius was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on his daughter. He could see the fire in her eyes, a fire he knew too well. It was the same fire he'd had to fight with his whole life. He'd spent years carefully curating his image, making sure every move he made was calculated to maximize his success. But Maya was different. She wasn't afraid to speak up, to call out injustice no matter the cost. "All right," Darius said finally, a slight nod. "We do this your way. But we do it smart. We're not going to just light a match and watch it burn. We'll make sure we have every piece in place before we move." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Dad." The next day, Maya's phone buzzed with notifications. It was a message from Rachel. "Have you seen the news? Mrs. Carter's son is the one who filed the complaint against you at the police station." Maya froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't heard this before. Mrs. Carter's son. Maya quickly clicked on the link Rachel had sent, her mind racing. The headline read, "Teenager's racial profiling incident involving local resident goes public." The article was about her, but buried in the details was something she hadn't expected. Mrs. Carter's son, a college student who had apparently been aware of the situation from the beginning, had filed an official complaint against Maya after the police incident. Maya stared at her phone, trying to process the information. This changed everything. This wasn't just Mrs. Carter's actions. This was her whole family, complicit in the racism she'd faced. And if they had worked together to silence her, that only made the stakes higher. She quickly texted Rachel back. "We need to meet. This is bigger than I thought." The cafe was packed that evening, a cacophony of voices filling the air, as Maya met Rachel, Malik, and Jamal. She placed her phone on the table and leaned forward, her voice tense with urgency. "Mrs. Carter's son filed a complaint," Maya said, her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. "This isn't just about her anymore. They're trying to paint me as the problem." Malik's face twisted in disbelief. "Are you serious? How can they twist this around?" "I don't know, but they're trying to," Maya said, her voice dropping. "They're trying to make it look like I'm the one causing trouble. They've got a whole narrative now." Rachel reached for Maya's hand across the table, her grip firm. "We won't let them get away with this. We need to show everyone the truth, expose their whole family, their complicity." Jamal leaned back, running his hand through his hair. "So, what's the plan? We go to the media with this? Do we have enough evidence?" Maya nodded. "We've got more than enough. I've got my story, the video footage from that day, and now we have this. The complaint. This is about more than just Mrs. Carter. It's about how the system protects people like her, even when they're in the wrong." "I'll help with the press," Rachel said, her voice determined. "We can draft a statement, organize a rally. We need to make sure everyone knows the full story." Maya looked around at her friends, her heart swelling with gratitude. They weren't just supporting her anymore. They were with her in this fight. This wasn't just about a single incident. This was about standing up to a system that had been broken for far too long.
The next morning, Maya's father called her into his office. He was already on the phone with several high-profile lawyers and advisors, his voice steady and calm. But when he saw Maya walk in, he hung up, his gaze locking with hers. "It's time," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We're taking this public." Maya felt a thrill of excitement run through her. This was it. This was the moment she'd been working toward. The world would see the truth, they would see her strength, her resilience, and the injustice she'd faced. Darius gestured for her to sit across from him. "I've arranged for a press conference tomorrow morning. It'll be small, but it'll get the right people's attention. We'll control the narrative from here on out." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. "I'm ready." The press conference was held the next day, a quiet affair, but one that would spark the fire of change. Maya stood at the podium, the weight of the cameras and reporters' eyes on her. Her father stood beside her, a quiet strength behind her. "Maya," a reporter called from the crowd, "what would you say to Mrs. Carter and her family if they're watching?" Maya's eyes flashed with determination as she leaned into the microphone. "I would say this: racism is not something we should tolerate. It's not something we should sweep under the rug. We will hold people accountable. And we will not be silenced." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. What had started as a single post on social media had evolved into a full-scale movement. Maya's story was now being discussed across news channels, blogs, and even university campuses. There were rallies organized in her name, and activists across the country were using her story to shed light on the deeper issue of systemic racism. Maya had become a symbol, not just of one individual's experience, but of a much larger battle. But with all the support also came intense scrutiny. The media didn't just cover her fight for justice. They dissected every part of her life. They analyzed her words, her actions, even her friendships. Maya couldn't escape it, and some days, it felt suffocating. Sitting in her room one evening, she scrolled through the constant barrage of headlines. Some were sympathetic, others critical. A few were outright hostile. Is Maya Montgomery the face of the new civil rights movement? Racism or attention-seeking? The truth behind Maya Montgomery's claims. Her thumb froze on the screen as a headline caught her eye. Mrs. Carter responds to allegations. Claims misunderstanding at the heart of the police incident. Maya let out a frustrated breath. Mrs. Carter had gone on national television, painting herself as the victim. She claimed that she had been misled by her own fear and that her call to the police had been a mistake. A misunderstanding, nothing more. "She's still trying to hide behind her lies," Maya muttered to herself. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. "We need to meet. The news has something new. It's time we turn the heat up. They won't just sweep this under the rug." The next morning, Maya stood outside her father's office, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Darius had promised her they'd take things to the next level, but that was before the media circus had intensified. She wasn't sure what he had planned, but she trusted him. When he saw her walk in, he gave her a small, knowing smile. "You ready?" Maya nodded, though she still felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't sure what she was ready for, but she was sure of one thing: she wasn't backing down. Darius led her to a seat at his desk and opened a file, laying out a series of documents in front of her. "This is where we hit them hardest." Maya glanced at the pages, quickly scanning the content. "What's this?" "A lawsuit," Darius said, his voice low but confident. "We're going after Mrs. Carter and her family. The complaint against you was baseless, but she and her son decided to make you the scapegoat. It's time to make sure they feel the consequences." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting something like this, but to see it in writing was a whole other thing. The thought of suing Mrs. Carter, of taking legal action, felt like another layer of this fight. It was no longer just about standing up for herself. This was about dismantling the systems that allowed people like Mrs. Carter to act without fear of consequence. "This could get ugly," Maya said quietly, her mind racing. "What if the backlash is worse than what we've already faced?" Darius leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Sometimes, you have to make the hard decisions to get the change you want. This isn't just about clearing your name, Maya. It's about showing everyone that actions like this have consequences." Maya sat back, letting his words sink in. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had been oppressed. She would make sure that Mrs. Carter, her son, and anyone like them would understand that their actions had a price. "I'm in," Maya said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." The lawsuit was filed the next day, and the response was immediate. The media, who had been so quick to jump on the bandwagon of sensationalism, now turned their focus to the legal battle. Supporters rallied behind Maya, but there was also a fierce backlash. Mrs. Carter and her son were quick to hire their own lawyers, framing the case as one of miscommunication and false accusations. But Maya wasn't about to let them control the narrative. She doubled down on her story, taking to social media once again, this time with an even more powerful message: this isn't just about me. This is about a system that enables people to act out of prejudice without fear of consequences. The time for complacency is over. I'm not backing down. If you stand with me, stand up. Stand up for justice. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people began to share their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination. It became clear that Maya's fight wasn't just hers, it was a fight for justice on a much larger scale. A few weeks later, the day of the trial arrived. Maya sat in the courtroom, her back straight, her heart pounding as she watched the proceedings unfold. She was no longer the scared teenager she had been when the cops had first arrived on her porch. She was a force to be reckoned with now. Mrs. Carter took the stand, her face tight with frustration, her voice shaky as she spoke about the misunderstanding that had occurred. She denied any intent to discriminate, claiming that she had called the police out of fear, not hatred. Maya's lawyer stood, confident and steady. Fear of what, Mrs. Carter? He asked, his voice calm but piercing. Fear of a black teen standing on her own porch? Fear of someone who's lived in this neighborhood for weeks without issue. Mrs. Carter faltered for a moment, then regained her composure. I didn't know her, she said, her voice growing defensive. I didn't know if she belonged here. Maya's lawyer wasn't done. But you assumed she didn't you? You assumed she was a threat, based only on the color of her skin. That's not a misunderstanding, Mrs. Carter. That's racism. The room fell silent. The weight of the accusation hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The trial stretched on for days, but Maya knew that the tide was shifting. The evidence, her story, and the outpouring of support from the public were too powerful to ignore. Mrs. Carter's attempt to hide behind her fear and misunderstanding was unraveling when the verdict finally came. It wasn't just a victory for Maya. It was a victory for everyone who had been silenced by racism. For every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Because of their skin color, the court ruled in Maya's favor. Mrs. Carter and her son were ordered to pay restitution for the emotional distress caused by the false accusations. But the bigger win came from the statement issued by the judge, that racial profiling, no matter how unintentional, would not be tolerated. Maya stood in the courtroom, the weight of the decision sinking in. Her fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. She had taken on the system and won. The day after the verdict, Maya woke up to a flood of messages. Her phone buzzed constantly, notifications from the news outlets, her friends, strangers reaching out with words of encouragement. Her inbox was overflowing with emails and messages from people who had followed her story from the beginning. Some offering their support, others sharing their own experiences with racial injustice. Maya had been expecting this. What she hadn't expected was how the weight of everything would feel. The victory was sweet, but it came with a responsibility, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. She sat in her bedroom, staring at her phone. It had been a whirlwind week, and she hadn't had time to process everything. The press, the court battle, the relentless focus on her life. She had never wanted to be the center of attention. She just wanted justice. But now, her fight had made her a symbol. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. Maya, you're needed downstairs. She sighed, pushed the hair out of her face, and set the phone down. She stood and walked downstairs, where Darius sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. He looked up when she entered, a slight smile on his face. You all right? He asked gently. Maya nodded, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. I don't know, Dad. I keep thinking about everything that happened. And it feels heavy. I don't want to just be the black girl who sued someone for racism. I don't want that to be all I'm known for. Darius set his mug down, his expression softening. I understand. But you've done something bigger than just standing up for yourself. You've given people the courage to speak out, to stand up for their own rights. You've ignited something, Maya. And that's not a small thing. Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. But I didn't expect all of this. The attention, the pressure. I didn't ask for it. You didn't have to, Darius said, his voice calm but filled with pride. Sometimes, the world forces us into positions we didn't choose. But that doesn't mean you're not ready for it. You're more than capable. Maya leaned against the doorframe, still unsure of how she felt. What if I mess it up, though? What if I say the wrong thing, or the people who are supporting me turn on me? Her father's gaze softened, and he stood up, walking over to her. He placed his hands on her shoulders and met her eyes. Maya, the people who are supporting you now are the people who believe in what you stand for. And if anyone turns on you, that's their loss. You can't control what others think. But you can control how you respond. You've already shown strength. You've already shown grace. You're not alone in this. Not ever. Maya's chest tightened with emotion as she looked up at him. It was hard to ignore the pressure, but hearing him speak with such certainty grounded her. "You're right," she said quietly. "I just have to keep going, even when it feels like too much." Darius nodded, his voice low and steady. "Exactly. Keep moving forward. You've already changed things. Now, keep pushing. You've got this." The next few days were a blur of media appearances, interviews, and public appearances. Maya found herself standing at podiums, answering questions, and talking to people who wanted to hear her story. It was exhilarating, but also exhausting. At times, it felt like she was being pulled in 1,000 different directions, all while trying to maintain the image of someone who had it all together. One night, after a particularly draining interview, Maya found herself at the same cafe where it all began. She was alone, sitting in the corner with her laptop open but not really looking at it. She just needed a moment of peace. The door chimed, and she looked up to see Rachel and Malik entering. They waved as they approached, and Maya's tense shoulders finally began to relax. "You look like you need a drink," Malik said, sitting across from her with a grin. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Maya smiled wearily, glad to see her friends. "I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." Rachel sat down beside her, her expression thoughtful. "You've been through so much already. But the fight's not over, right? There's still work to do. And you're not doing it alone." Maya's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a while, she felt her anxiety ease. Rachel was right. The fight wasn't over, but she didn't have to carry the weight of it alone. "It's funny," Maya said, looking down at her hands. "I thought everything would feel different once I won. I thought I'd feel free, you know? But instead, I just feel like there's more to do." "That's the thing about fighting for something bigger than yourself," Malik said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't stop when you win. You keep going. Because the change you started is just the beginning." Maya nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. "I think I'm finally starting to get it." Rachel smiled, reaching over and giving her a small, encouraging pat on the hand. "We're with you, Maya. Every step of the way." A few weeks later, Maya stood on the steps of the courthouse once more, but this time, it was different. The press had gathered, but they weren't here just for the story about the lawsuit. They were here for her, for the movement she had sparked. Maya took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she approached the microphone. She had learned so much about herself, about the system, about the importance of speaking out. This moment wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had faced injustice, who had been silenced, who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. "Thank you all for being here," Maya began, her voice clear and strong. "When I first stood on that porch, I never imagined this would be where we'd end up. But I've learned something important through this process, that no matter how loud the silence may seem, no matter how difficult the fight feels, the truth always has a way of coming through." The crowd grew still, hanging on her every word. "We've taken a step toward justice, but the work doesn't stop here. We cannot let this fight end with me. We must keep speaking up, standing together, and demanding change. This is just the beginning." Maya's voice trembled slightly, but her words were strong. "Together, we will make sure that no one else has to face what I did. And we will continue to fight for those who can't fight for themselves." She stepped back from the microphone, and the applause erupted around her. It wasn't just the applause of a victory, but the sound of a movement that had only just begun. The months that followed Maya's victory were nothing short of transformative. Her story continued to resonate with people from all walks of life, sparking a wave of conversations, protests, and discussions about race, privilege, and the power of speaking out. She was no longer just the girl who had been targeted by her neighbor. She was now an integral part of a much larger dialogue on systemic racism. Yet, despite all the external changes, Maya found herself grappling with the personal toll of it all. She had won in court, but the aftermath was far more complicated. The weight of being in the spotlight, constantly answering questions, and carrying the hopes of so many others felt overwhelming at times. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing with doubts and worries. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day filled with interviews and speaking engagements, Maya found herself in the quiet sanctuary of her room. Her father had been working late, and for the first time in days, the house was still. Maya sank into the chair by her desk, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from Rachel. "How are you holding up? I know it's been a lot lately. Let me know if you need to talk." Maya stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "I don't know, Rachel. I think I'm starting to feel it. The pressure. The responsibility. It's all so much." The reply came quickly. "I get it. But you're doing incredible things. You've already changed so many lives, including mine. You've inspired me, and I know you've inspired so many others." Maya let out a sigh, feeling the weight of the words. Rachel was right. She had come a long way, and the support she had received was overwhelming. But still, the burden of being the face of something so significant felt heavy. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about carrying the movement forward. She leaned back in her chair, her mind wandering back to that day on the porch when everything had begun. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the memory was still fresh. The fear, the anger, the resolve that had risen in her, unbidden but powerful. She remembered how she had stood her ground in front of the officers, how she had refused to be intimidated, but the journey from there to here had been anything but simple. Her thoughts shifted to her father. Darius had been by her side every step of the way, offering guidance, encouragement, and the strength she sometimes lacked. He had always been there to remind her of who she was, to push her to be bolder, braver. She owed him so much, but now, Maya realized, it was time for her to step into the next phase of her journey. The fight was far from over, but she had learned that it wasn't always about facing every battle head-on. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do was to step back and reflect. To understand that healing, both personal and societal, took time. A few days later, Maya stood in front of a crowd of hundreds at a rally in a downtown park. The event was organized by various civil rights groups, each of whom had been inspired by her story. The crowd was diverse, a mixture of young and old, black and white, men and women, all gathered to support the cause of racial justice. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped up to the podium, the weight of the moment hitting her all at once. She hadn't planned on speaking today. She had only come to show support, to be part of the larger movement. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt the familiar surge of resolve. Taking the microphone, she cleared her throat, the crowd falling silent in anticipation. "Thank you all for being here today," Maya began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I started this journey, I never imagined that it would lead to a moment like this. I never imagined that I would become a symbol of resistance, a face of the fight for justice. But now that I'm here, I realize that the real power doesn't lie in the headlines, in the victory in court, or in the media attention.